Hello everyone, this is CounterYolo bringing you another video in Star Trek Online. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about budget builds again. And based upon some of the things that have changed, along with a lot of the advice that I've been receiving from you all in terms of how to make these builds better, we're going to be addressing that for the current year. Now, obviously, we should be getting some sort of new reputation and new specialization. That could very easily change a lot of the recommendations that I'm suggesting for this video. Barring any of that, this is my recommendations for now. I'll start off this video with a brief intro section of how I define budget builds. I'll go into, some basics of our species, traits, and bridge officers, some budget consoles and weapons, and then we'll get into the actual rough builds themselves in space and ground. The grounds portion is going to be extremely quick, like the last probably just like 2-3 minutes of the video in total. But as there's been some demand for this, and as I really won't have that much time to do one-on-one helping with many of y'all with builds, considering the current situation and the things that I am doing to help with that, this is basically the best that I can do for most of you for now. Anyway, feel free to see the description for time links. There probably won't be much of many other links. I'm not sure how my schedule is going to be going forward. But anyway, the big thing for me anyway is I like budget builds primarily because I am someone who has a big altinitis problem. I make lots and lots of alts. Sometimes they only last a couple months. Sometimes I use them for a long time. But I do have a lot of alts for a lot of different things. And even for me, and I play elite content from time to time, I only have like 5 characters that I play elite content on. The rest of the dozens and dozens of characters that I have, I honestly really just use them for advanced content at most. And I think that's fine. I mean, the vast majority of the player base doesn't even play advanced. They play normal just to get through the story and to experience what the game has to offer. I personally only got into advanced like 4 years ago, just because I wanted to get through some of the reputations faster, frankly, in terms of getting some of the reputation equipment for some of the cosmetic things in the game. And I didn't want to wait weeks and weeks to get all those, to get that special reputation currency that you can only get 1 of per day if you cover 100 marks to that particular currency. And I wanted to not wait as long. Competitive reputation really is stuck that way, unfortunately, with the way it is today. But with the other reputations, you could do advanced for those different TFOs and get those things a little bit faster. But yeah, for most players, it's either normal or advanced. Very few go for elite content, and there's not very many rewards for elite content really anyway, besides a couple of titles if you do accolades during them, and like some cosmetic stuff with the Omega Guard armor. But anyway, because of that, I mean, especially if you're someone that's like me who has a bazillion characters, being able to know how to make some affordable, viable builds for many of your characters is something that might be of interest to you. Now, for all of these builds, by the way, they can all do 30k DPS, by the way. The science one can do like 45k. But this is all stuff with just Mark 12 very rare gear that's available from either missions, reputation, specific crafting that doesn't require upon any RNG mods to pop up on them, or just require a little bit of time inside the game. I'm not going to be using anything for these builds that require any upgrading, re-rolling, things from the fleet, because obviously not only does fleet stuff take a while to build up, but most fleets require a certain amount of contributions to get those items from the fleet to allow you to give access to them. And I mean, if you're going to have dozens and dozens of characters, that's something that's not really going to be super reasonable to have for 8 bazillion characters. Additionally, things from the exchange or from the C-store or from limited time events, I'm not going to include in here either. Just because I don't think that's reasonable to ask. I want it so that if you come into this game at any point in time, you should be able to look at my builds in here and be able to use them. You could do it at your own pace, and it doesn't matter how long it takes you to do something. You will eventually be able to do anything that I'm talking about in this video. So, and here's just more clarifications in terms of what my definition of budget is, as I've talked about in my first budget beam tank video on this channel last year, which is like one of my most viewed videos on this channel somehow. Anyway, in terms of the big changes, most of the Tier 5U ships are gone, meaning that back in the day, I used to say, you know, hey, here's a couple of ships that you can get off the exchange. They're really cheap. Most people are overlooking them, and they have a free Tier 5U upgrade on them, so you can have 11 consoles without spending that much in the game and have a ship that scales into the end game, meaning advanced TFOs just fine. With those rarer and rarer in the game, and the only ones really left in the game becoming more and more expensive, I'm going to be sticking now just to the Tier 5s that you get through leveling. So the free one that you choose at level 40 or level 61 are going to be the ones that I'm going to be having for this video series going forward. The big obstacles versus the old stuff was that we're now down 2 consoles, and we're down on average about 35% hull HP. Those are 2 big obstacles that we're going to be trying to overcome. Yes, there's going to be some big hurdles there, but some of these ships are still pretty decent, frankly. And here's all the ones available for free from level 40 or level 61. Keep in mind, your level 61 token can be used for a level 40 starship as well, but your level 40 token cannot be used for the level 61 starships. So just keep that in mind. There's all the starships there for the different playstyles for beam, cannon, and science. Those are my recommendations for Federation, Klingon, and Romulan Republic. Keep in mind your Dominion captains start at level 60, and then they have a Tier 5U escort effectively that they start off with, and then after the first mission they get to level 61, and then they can choose one of the level 61 starships as well, if they want something different other than an escort. Now for this video, I'm going to be sticking with the Romulan 3 starships that I recommend just for simplicity's sake, because they're usable by all captains. And you know, if you wanted to, you could grind the dilithium and get a lot of these ships, or you could just go to the C-store and just buy something better if you want. I like these ships a lot because, I mean, for the average player, being able to use a gravity well is pretty nice. Photonic Officer is great, especially because in this video, I'm not going to be considering any duty officers whatsoever in builds, which means Aux to Bat, when it comes to cooldowns, is not going to be a consideration whatsoever. So these are the recommended builds. If you notice in the Science Starship over there, we don't actually have Tactical Team. That's why we have so many heals elsewhere, because we need that for a particular set that's being used with that particular starship. The other bigger changes, just obviously, was that we got a couple of nice things from the Discovery Legends reputation. The Lorca's custom firing controls is pretty much a meta console for basically any build in the game. Only if you're going to do one of those niche support builds would you not want to use this thing. Even so, you might want to have this to have crits on your heals, which is a thing in this game, by the way. The 2-piece with the torpedo gives us extra crit severity that stacks based upon crits that we do, which means that this 2-piece combo is going to be in every single budget build in this video, every single one of them. Additionally, for the space set, Tilly's review pending modified shield is pretty nice because it gives you extra shield pen based upon your shield power. So that's pretty nice. And the 2-piece commonly used with either the singularity core, warp core, or engines, gives you a lot of extra hull regeneration. It scales with your max HP, which also means it's not going to be quite as useful for us in this video because our hull HP is going to be much lower than lots of other people who have Tier 6 starships or Tier 5U starships. When it comes to leveling anyway, from the mission power pick'em, or however you say that, the regenerative crystal shield matrix is actually pretty nice. It is one of the better shields in the game when it comes to tanking. It's not part of any sets, which is quite unfortunate. It is very overlooked in the game because of that. Ships with a very high shield ratio can benefit highly from this regenerative shield crystal matrix. There are a couple of sets that are better in the game when it comes to survival for more budget end, but we can get to that in just a moment. Same as in other videos, recommendations for bridge officers is that in space, if you're a Romulan captain, get 5 Romulan operative bridge officers for your space seats. Technically, you can get these off the exchange really cheap, or you can just go with whatever the game gives you, frankly. It gives you a bit of extra crit chance and crit severity, which is always going to be useful. For Federation captains, the Hierarchy Science Officer from the Delta Quadrant, plus 4 human bridge officers for extra regen and subsystem offline resist is totally fine. And then for the Klingon Empire, the Hierarchy Officer plus 4 Nausicaan bridge officers for space is going to be what you would probably want. In terms of traits, just about everything here, besides like beam training and beam barrage and point blank shot, is more of here to help us survive easier, just because since we're down about 35% hull HP versus a tier 5 or tier 6 version of our starship, it's going to be a lot easier to get one shot with the starships that we're in. So this is just to help a little bit more with our survival. Not to mention there aren't really a lot of great damage options available for free in the game either. So there is that stuff to be made. Techie is still perfectly fine. Bulkhead Technician helps with HP as well. And of course, Regenerative Control Synergy gives you extra regen based upon if you do controls. All of those ships that I mentioned have gravity well in there, so that's going to be proccing off of all of our gravity wells. For the exotic list, you need Particle Manipulator. Even at the budget level, we're going to be able to get 250 particle generators on our ship, which means this is going to give us 50% critical chance on our exotic abilities, which is very massive. It means that we can tech a lot more into crit severity for our build, especially as a science captain. Conservation of energy is also nice. If you're having troubles with survival, well, this is going to give you more damage whenever you're getting hit. If you have a tank dedicated with you, then you're not going to want to slot this because they're going to take all the threat from you, but science quite often gets a lot of threat even at the budget end that I found very easily. Again, most of the rest of the stuff here, Bulkhead Technician, Redirector Armor Plating, Shield Technician, Techie, etc. It's all there for extra survival because your stats are going to be so low in terms of the survival department. When it comes to starship traits, the Arrest trait is something you really should look into. It's from the Constable Specialization, which is the newest partial specialization in the game. I think that came out around the time Victory's Life came out, or a little bit later, something around there. It's been a while, but it's like the newest thing that we've had in the game. It's basically our budget version for cooldown management, especially if you're not doing Ox to Bat, and you don't have something like Improved Photonic Officer for science captains. For exotic builds, Arrest is pretty much the trait that you should be slotting. If you have Ox to Bat and other things in your skill tree, maybe not, but otherwise you probably are going to need Arrest in your starship traits. The best defense is from a mission, so it's pretty easy to get. Go the extra miles, just extra passive, extra healing, that's nice. And Unconventional Tactics just gives you extra damage as well from an ability that you're probably never going to use otherwise. Here's just some reputation and active stuff here. A lot of this is for a more defensive style. That's why we have Ox Power Defense here, just for extra HP. Automated Perimeter Conduits we have here as well, because we aren't going to be able to use the offensive version, just because the concept is that we're not going to have a ton of damage on the ship, and so extra healing based upon damage is probably not going to scale as well for us. Chrono Capacitor Arrays for extra cooldown management, because we're going to need it, because we don't have lots of great traits to help out with that. And then those are just the active reputation ones that I personally recommend. Biomolecular Shield Generator, Deploy Sensor Interface as well, and then Anti-Time Entanglement, Airfracking Tetryon Cascade. The active reputation from the new Discovery reputation is also pretty good as well, but it's much, in my opinion, it's much more situational as to why you'd want to use that one over the other ones here. Of course, if you want to just go full damage, you can replace one of the other generators with that as well. In terms of the space set, obviously the Kabali 3-piece from the Dust to Dust mission is still pretty nice. The mission is a little annoying to complete, especially if you are someone who hasn't played the mission before. The Vodwar missions is something you should probably skip over entirely until you've got most of your space build kind of set up. Especially for the budget end, they are one of the hardest enemies to fight in the game. You can't just sit and park and blow them up. You have to constantly be moving around, which does disproportionately affect cannon builds more than anyone else in the game. So just keep that in mind. The preeminent warp core is one of the best survival warp cores in the game from a mission. So that's another nice one there. From a more survival standpoint, Miracle Worker primary with strategist or command or temporal operative secondary is probably one of the better ways to go. If you do want to go more offensive, you can go intel primary and then strategist, command, or commando secondary. Or if you're doing stuff for ground as well, temporal operative is pretty nice as well. Again, for a more offensive playstyle, but for a little bit more survival too, the Soul Defense, Deflector, and Impulse engines from the Midnight mission is pretty nice. Once you're at a high enough level, the mission where Angels Fear to Tread will give you the Deuterium Stabilized Warp Core as well, which does give you a lot of power cost reduction that you don't have to go to the exchange or craft it yourself in order to get something like that, which is pretty nice. And then the Regenerative Crystal Shield Matrix is still pretty nice as well. You could also just use the Soul Defense shield there as well to get the Discharge, Repair, and Nanites clicky as well. Because I know I'm going to get asked this a lot, this is the meta pretty much for directed energy weapon builds in space. Fleet Colony Deflector, competitive reputation engines, whatever type that you like the most, along with the Discovery Reputation, Warp Core, and Shield. If you don't need survival, you can replace that Warp Core with a Fleet Elite Spire Warp Core or Singularity Core. Again, fleet stuff is in budget in my opinion, so I'm not going to be really considering this for these builds. And for stuff for space, for exotic stuff, the Temporal Defense stuff is actually pretty good as well. I would personally just go with the Temporal Defense 4-piece at this point. That does give you an extra clicky alongside the 2-piece damage overtime buff to all of your stuff. All right, when it comes to budget consoles themselves, again, this is about the same as it has been before. TrillMD plating is very, very nice, especially for exotic-based builds because you get a ton of extra shield power. But this is if you're going to have one damage resistance rating console on your ship, it's probably going to be this one. Of course, if you're going to the exchange, then the DPRM is going to be the one you're going to be using as your one damage resistance rating console. But if you need something from a mission, this is the one to choose. Reinforced Armaments is basically a power transfer rate console with some extra survival alongside it. And its 2-piece for phasers is also very, very nice. House Martok is a stat stick to give you extra survival, but also keep in mind its 2-piece with disruptors gives you extra penetration with your weapons as well. So there's nothing wrong with that either. The Connective RCS Accelerator from R&D 15 Engineering Crafting gives you extra turn rate and extra shield resistance whenever you heal yourself. So basically you get extra resistance whenever you need that extra resistance. It's not going to be in any of our builds today, just because we don't have enough console slots to make it work. We're down 2 consoles, and so we're just doing the best that we can. Same thing with Sustained Radiant Field. It's not going to be in any of the builds today, but it does give you extra all-around damage and extra survival with healing. So if you have extra slots or think it's better than something else that I recommend today, feel free to slot it instead. When it comes to science, Sense Power Manipulator does give you a lot of crit chance anyway. Adding in the Temporal Disentanglement Suite to give you an extra 10% crit severity on top of what you already have is also pretty nice. Plus a little bit of extra shield resistance to survive a little bit easier when you're doing all that threat with your damage. The Temporally Shielded Data Core is an EPG console that also gives you some extra physical and kinetic resistance. So that's always something that is welcome. Keep in mind, with a lot of these budget ones here especially, do not upgrade these. There are many consoles that are better for science damage, in particular in space, that don't even need upgrading. If you go to the super high-end stuff nowadays, a lot of them just use a bazillion clicky consoles now, and I've seen some extreme ones that don't even use fleet consoles anymore for their science builds. So just keep that in mind. They made a refocuser. We're actually not going to use this in our science build either, but it does give some extra shield healing too. The Exotic Particle Field Exciter is a fine console as well. The super high end prefers the EPG mod on this thing so that they can, again, focus more on their clicky consoles themselves. And the assembly module is a staple standard for a lot of builds. At the super high end, sometimes you won't see this in their build because there's just too many other good consoles competing with it. But it gives you a nice amount of crit chance and crit severity. When it comes to tactical consoles, this is a pretty straightforward category at this point. You put in the Lorca's custom firing controls. It's basically meta for every build in the game. So once you get to tier 5 disco rep, get this console and put it in your build. The Morphoject Matrix Controller is also meta for all Polaron builds. I've also been testing this with Science, and it's very good with Science builds too if you have enough tactical slots to pull off, or if you have a particular trait, so you only need 2 tactical abilities to pull off, then it's really, really good. I've heard it's also good for torpedo-specific builds as well. I'm not a torpedo-only captain. I'm not interested in that type of playstyle. I just don't enjoy it, and when I do high DPS with it, it just doesn't feel fun. So if you're interested in specific torp builds only, feel free to check out Timberwolf or check out Augmented Dictator Games. They both have a lot of fantastic builds about torp specific builds. Alongside those two things, the chronometric capacitor is still fine for exotic based builds. At the super high end, you won't see this anymore. And I'm actually not even going to be using the set other weapons that come with the chronometric capacitor from the Time and Tide mission anymore. There are a couple things that have changed, and when I get to the science build, I will talk about it before I show those weapons and consoles. For the rest of your filler tactical consoles, I have listed here for the 6 main energy types what the names of those things are. So that if you need to go to the exchange, if you've leveled to 65 and still can't find those, just for a couple thousand energy credits, not that expensive to get just Mark 12s of them. You can go for the common versions if you want to sell them back on the exchange later, or just grind them down for materials for rerolling later if you want. Or you can go for higher ones if you just want to sell them after you've gotten better ones later. But names of them all there, so you go ahead and just go with that. Keep in mind, for these budget builds, you don't have to read this if you don't want to. Basically what it comes down to is, because we don't have things like emergency weapon cycle, pretty much the difference between 6 to 7 energy weapons isn't really consequential. And if you're using 8 energy weapons, it's probably going to give you less DPS even overall than if you had 6 or 7. It's just the way that power cost works in this game. That this was a more big concern back in the day. It's not as much anymore if you have a couple of traits. We don't have those in this build, and that's the assumption. So we're going to be continuing on. And we're using Romulan ships with their Romulan warbirds, so we're not going to have any cruiser commands, because Romulan ships don't have cruiser commands besides the Sulwan Silic. So unless you're a Polaron build, you're not going to want to use 8 weapons, but again, if you're doing Polaron, you're going to be having to use the Polaron Morphoject torpedo anyway. So basically, all these builds are going to be using 6 or 7 energy weapons, besides the science one, which we'll get to at the end. To start off with, we'll start off with Polaron. This is my favorite type in the game. Part of that is because, the piezo proc and the temporal defense chronometric proc are 2 of the 3 strongest survival procs in the game, and Polaron has access to both of them. One directly through their main reputation of the Lucari reputation, and additionally their proc with the temporal defense stuff is normally Antiproton, but the tier 6 weapon variant of that is Polaron. So you're able to get both with this reputation, so that's pretty nice. We also have the Dark Matter Quantum Torpedo in the front, because that synergizes with the Lore custom firing controls to give us that 2-piece bonus of extra crit severity whenever we are critting our enemies. In the rear, we have the morphogenic energy weapon and torpedo. We are not using the 2-piece with the ordnance accelerator because that requires the turret or the omni beam, which the morphogenic Polaron energy weapon counts as a omni beam, so we can't use that one with it. And we're just rounding out the weapons with extra piezo Polaron beam arrays. Keep in mind, if you want to go more DPS oriented, you could go to the mission Boldly They Go, and you can just grind and get a bunch of Dominion Polaron weapons, which to my understanding are some of the best weapons when it comes to Polaron damage for Polaron weapons anyway. In terms of the consoles themselves, Tetryon deplating for extra passive survival, reinforced armaments for that power transfer rate, and then House Martok for extra base stats. Combined with the piezo electric focuser, its 2-piece gives us extra Polaron damage. Orange accelerator also gives us extra Polaron damage, and a similar module gives us extra crit chance, crit severity. And then Lorca's custom fire controls, because every build's going to have that. Morphogenic for the 3-piece, and then a Polaron phase modulator to just round out our tactical consoles there. Now moving over to the dual cannon option, we're changing it around a little bit. We are down one less engineering console, and so House Martok is gone now for an extra Polaron phase modulator. As for our weapons themselves, they've mostly remained the same, but they've gone to the dual cannon version with advanced fields of Polaron dual cannons, advanced temporal defense Polaron dual cannons, and then for our other dual cannon front, I'm using a wide arc Polaron dual cannon here. You're more than welcome to use a piezo Polaron dual cannon, or use a gamma reputation dual cannon, or use a Dominion Polaron dual cannon if you want. In the back again, we still have the morphogenic Polaron weapon and morphogenic torpedo, because that 3-piece is just so good. And because we can actually slot in the advanced inhibiting Polaron heavy turret to give us an extra 10% extra Polaron damage with the ordnance accelerator 2-piece. And then for that last slot is an experimental slot on this particular ship, so just whatever you have available for that experimental slot, you're welcome to put there. I don't really care too much about experimental weapons, so I'm just leaving it whatever the standard is for you. For disruptors, their beams are a bit stronger than their dual cannons when it comes to budget end, even though obviously they're some of the best energy types in the game when it comes to DPS at the end game. The Terran Task Force Disruptor is super strong. It's not quite as useful on beam overload builds, but it is still a strong thing nonetheless. Dark Matter Quantum, obviously. The Experimental Realm and Disruptor Boom Array is pretty nice for its 2-piece with 0-point energy conduit. Also, I'm not sure if this is intended, but it appears that the old proc that used to be on this weapon that made it so the weapon didn't cost power to fire, it appears that might be the case again. I'm not 100% sure on that, but that's what the appearance seems to be right now. But anyway, alongside that, we have the Nautican 3-piece with the Nautican Siphon Capacitor, the beam array, as well as the torpedo. Keep in mind, once you get to almost mid-level things, you're probably going to want to replace those pieces eventually, but it's fine for most builds. Additionally, we have the House Martok 360 weapon, because combined with House Martok defensive configuration, this does give us some extra penetration with our weapons, and then we're just rounding it out with 2 Disruptor Beam Arrays. There are a lot of great Disruptor Beam Array variants, or just Disruptor subtypes in the game. Spiral Wave Disruptors are pretty nice. A lot of the linked disruptors are also pretty nice too. I don't consider those budget, because you do have to go and buy that somewhere else. But it is still nice nonetheless. In terms of things that have changed for us in terms of the consoles themselves, we've added the Nautican Siphon Capacitor. which is from a mission, and it gives us some extra disruptor damage, and 0-point energy conduit from the new Romulus reputation. It gives us some extra. It gives us some extra crit, and then also its piece with the Romulan weapon gives us some extra bonuses too and extra damage. Other than that, it's pretty much the same as a lot of the other builds here too. And then going over to the dual cannon variant, it's Terran Task Force again for dual cannons. The torpedo, we're using a wide arc disruptor dual cannon, and then just a regular dual cannon in front here as well to round it out. In the back, we have a heavy biomolecular disruptor turret. We don't have the two-piece with its other reputation console because we just don't have enough consoles to fit it in. I feel the other consoles there are a bit better for what they're giving you, frankly. But I mean, I obviously could be wrong. Feel free to let everyone know in the comments. I have no problem learning and improving. That's what I've been doing for the past couple of years doing this channel. And then the rest of the stuff in the back is just a couple of disruptor turrets and the experimental weapon. Other than that, everything's basically made the same here, besides the fact that we lose an engineering console to get an extra tactical console. When it comes to phasers, phasers are in a pretty good spot as well. We have the Terran Task Force Phaser Beam Array, which is from Tier 6 reputation. So keep that in mind. It'll take a while for you to get that. Dark Matter Quantum Torpedo, obviously, because that's always going to be our forward weapon at this point. The Quantum Phase Phaser Beam Array is a nice, very rare Mark 12 beam. If you have sensor linked or something like that, then obviously you'll use that over the Quantum Phase, but it's a nice phaser with a decent survival proc on it too. And then in the rear, we have the Trilithium Omni, the synergized with reinforced armaments. The two-piece bonus there gives us some extra firing cycle haste on our weapons, which is always welcome. We have the advanced wide arc quantum torpedo in the back, synergized with the two-piece with the quantum phase converter for some extra phaser damage. And then we have 3 regular phaser beam arrays just to round out the build itself. In terms of our consoles themselves, our science consoles are things that change here. We have Ordnance Accelerator, which is just like Polaron because that console affects phaser and Polaron damage. And then we have the quantum phase converter from the same mission that gives us the quantum phase beam array, because that one gives us some extra phaser damage. When it comes to changes to our dual cannon version, the big things is that instead of just a regular phaser in the front, it's now a wide arc phaser dual cannon alongside the quantum phase dual cannon, dark matter quantum, and Terran Task Force phaser dual cannon. In the rear, we actually don't have a torpedo now. We still have the Trilithium turret from that same mission. Then we got the Omni Trilithium weapon. We have the advanced inhibiting phaser heavy turret, and a heavy biomolecular phaser turret as well. Again, we don't have the console for the biomolecular two-piece because we don't have enough slots for it. When it comes to plasma, there's not a lot going for plasma, but I mean, we have 2 decent sets to use for at least for beams. For cannons, it's a little bit less of a story, but I mean, it's still there nonetheless. The Advanced Piezo Plasma Beam Array is pretty nice. It's a nice survival proc. It's 2-piece with the Piezo Electric Focuser, gives us a lot of plasma damage. So especially for budget and mid-level, it is very nice. In the super end game, you will get rid of the Piezo Electric Focuser for other stuff that gives you crit chance, crit severity, because regular damage only scales so far, and there's not a ton of extra bonus damage in the game comparatively. So at the end game, you'll try to stack as much of that bonus damage as possible. Alongside that, Dark Matter Quantum, Experimental Romulan Plasma Beam Array. And then most of our slots can be rounded out with the new Romulus Reputation's Romulan Plasma Beam Arrays. This is because the Romulan Plasma Beam Arrays and Plasma Dual Cannons and Turrets, that you get the Plasma proc as well as the Disruptor proc on your weapons, which is nice. The Disruptor proc is one of the better procs in the game when it comes to damage, so be able to have that for your plasma builds is also pretty nice. In terms of consoles themselves, nothing really stands out there. In terms of rare weapons, I am putting here the Omega Plasma Torpedo Launcher, more for the 2-piece with the assembly module, especially if you're going to go for a beam overload build. The Piezo Polar and Piezo Plasma Beam Array is very, very nice for beam overload builds, by the way. And that two-piece proc on a beam overload build is pretty insane, frankly. At least from what a lot of people have been saying on Reddit, people that I trust. That proc is really nice, and so having that in the rear is nice to have. And whenever this thing does proc, even with Beamfire Will, it is very noticeable. And be able to have procs that are actually noticeable in Star Trek Online with all the clutter that we have, if it's not better, at least it's fun. In terms of the dual cannon option, still advanced Plasma, Dark Matter Quantum. The new Romulus set doesn't have a dual cannon variant. It's just the beam array itself. So we're just going to have a White Arc Plasma dual cannon here, then a Romulan Plasma dual cannon to round out the front, along with 2 Romulan Plasma turrets, and then a heavy biomolecular plasma turret to round out the rear. Other than that, not much has really changed in the build whatsoever versus other builds that I've shown here. Yeah, a pretty decent build overall. In terms of Antiproton, this is an interesting thing to talk about. This is something that I've talked with several of you all about in the past year or so. In terms of what you want to use for the fillers. Now, obviously, the Advanced Temporal Defense Chronoton Beam Array you want to use, especially at the budget end, because not only is the proc good for survival, and it's a proc that lasts for 60 seconds, by the way, and it can stack up to 5 times. And it gives you extra shield resistance as well as turn. The Advanced Temporal Defense weapon in particular also reduces the cooldowns of all of your abilities by 5 seconds as well. So it is something that is going to be noticeable whenever it does proc. Alongside that, we have the Dark Matter Quantum because we're always going to have that in our builds now. I have the Advanced Radiant Antiproton Beam right here for fun, for extra visual stuff. I don't think that it's particularly needed. But it does give you some extra temporary HP, which, considering that we have such low HP in the first place on our ships, it's definitely nice to have in here at all. Considering that we're normally around, with just tier 5 starships, about 35% less HP than other ships, the proc that gives us some extra temporary HP, even though that proc doesn't scale because our ship is so low in HP, it makes sense. Additionally, in the rear, I'm using the Ancient Omnidirectional Antiproton Beam Array, combined with the Warp Core for some additional bonus antiproton damage. And then we round out the other weapons with either regular Antiproton Beam Arrays or with Temporal Defense Chronoton Beam Arrays. They're both fine. Regular Antiproton will give you more damage. Temporal Defense Chronotons will give you more survival. And since those procs can stack up to 5 times for that proc, and the proc can last for 60 seconds, it is worthwhile to stack multiple if you want that extra survival. If you want just more damage, Antiproton is totally fine. Regular Antiproton get instead of a regular proc, they just get inherent extra crit severity built into their weapons. That is why, if every weapon was created equal in terms of sets, Antiproton would definitely be up there. Because we have so many extra sets and things that are specific towards other specific energy types, Antiproton has started to lag versus other types over time. There was a time when well, not necessarily when I started, but close to whenever I started, that Antiproton was pretty much the king for a while in this game. So it's not, and I think that's okay. It still has its uses, and it's going to become good eventually. It is the weapon for the Alliance, as we can see with the 31st century starships, that's the default weapon type, at least at that point in time. So when it comes to consoles themselves, the big changes here is just that we have the Chronoton Drive Actuator, just because the two-piece with the Advanced Temporal Defense weapon gives us some extra crit severity, which is nice to have too. In terms of changes to the dual cannon version, there's not really too much besides just the conversions themselves from beams over to the dual cannon and turret variants. Instead of a regular antiproton beam in the front, for that 4th slot, we have a white arc version. And then we have a temporal defense turret and 2 antiproton turrets in the rear as well. Other than that, not too much has really changed, and nothing's really surprising here either. In terms of Tetryon, Tetryon is As I've said many times, it is the most lackluster energy type in the game right now. There's very few things that help it, even if you have an unlimited amount of money to invest in Tetryon. There's just not very much going for it. And it's never been king of really anything too much, so unless you're going for specific support / drain builds at some points in the game's history, Tetryon was passable for that. But in terms of the build itself, our only reputation weapon is the Advanced Radiant Tetryon Beam Array, which is from Tier 6 reputation. We have a Dark Matter Quantum Torpedo. We have the Antiproton Tetryon Beam Array from a mission. And you'll use the 2-piece with that to get some extra Tetryon damage to help out with your damage. And you'll fill the rest of it with Refracting Tetryon, because that's pretty much the best in the game right now in terms of the variants for Tetryon. It's either that or Diffusive Tetryon if you want to go to the exchange or to the low-buy store. That's pretty much all that you have to choose from. In terms of consoles, we have the Emitter Refocuser here because it gives you extra Tetryon damage. If you think of something that's better and want to slot that instead, or want to slot something better instead of like House Marthok or something, you're more than welcome to. In terms of the dual cannon option, again, it's pretty much the same. Everything's converted over to its whatever for other variant that it's going to be. You have a White Arc Tetryon in there as well, and then some Refracting Tetryons to kind of round out the rest of the build itself. So yeah, that's basically it for the energy types themselves. When it comes to science, this is the build that has changed the most. Of all the budget builds that I've done on this channel, this is the one that's changed the most, which I'm not particularly surprised about. I mean, I didn't even try Science and Space until Victorious Life came out because y'all encouraged me to do so. So I'm still relatively new when it comes to science builds. And from your criticisms, alongside me adding the Disco Rips Torpedo and Console because I'm doing that for all of these builds, the criticisms that I got in the past was, 1, why wasn't I using the Morphogenic 3-piece? And 2, why wasn't I using the Dyson Rips 3-piece? Because I already had the gravimetric already in science because it's really, really good. Why not just add the other stuff for both those to give extra crit chance and crit severity? And when you combine that with the fact that Particle Manipulator is really, really good on exotic builds, I tested them out, and you know what? You're right, community. You're right. I should be using these things. And so this build now is much different than the other budget builds, or even what I call my really, really good science build that I had before. So yes, this has changed quite a bit, and that's totally fine. I think it should be acceptable and fine to receive criticism and want to improve from it. And so this is what my build is currently. For the 4 weapons for this particular budget size build, we have the gravimetric photon torpedo launcher because it's the best side torp in the game. Particle emission plasma because it adds a ton of extra damage alongside that, as long as enemies are within the clouds. And then to round it out, we have the dark matter quantum in the front. It just seems to be outpacing everything else besides those other 2 torpedoes in terms of science DPS. So I'm using it. And it's just what it comes down to. The 2-piece is super nice as well. In terms of rear weapons, we have the morphogenic stuff here with the morphogenic 3-piece. It's literally just there for that. And fortunately, because the Dyson proton weapon is a single cannon instead of a dual cannon, we can actually slot it in the rear. If the Dyson proton weapon was made into a dual cannon, this will no longer be possible, but because it is, we can slot it in the rear. And combined with a gravimetric torpedo launcher and the proton particle stabilizer, which is a new console over there, we're able to have the 3-piece with that as well to get a lot of extra crit chance and crit severity in this build itself inherently. In terms of the consoles themselves, Trome Deplating gives us extra raw damage resistance rating for all energy types, plus we get some extra hull HP as well as some extra shield power. Because we're going to be full on aux power and we're going to have low power levels anyway on this ship, getting extra shield power for a ship like this one is very important. This is one that basically just needs to stay. Our other console, we're going to have a simulated module. It's something that I feel needs to be there, and so it's going to be there instead of other engineering consoles. If I could slot into more engineering consoles, if this was a tier 5 use ship, I definitely would. In terms of our science slots, temporal disentanglement suite, because we're going to be full Nox power, it gives us that full 2.5% crit chance and 10% crit severity additionally for all damage even, but that enhances science DPS in terms of the exotic damage even further. Temporary shield to data core is an EPG console that gives us extra kinetic and physical resistance. So it makes it so that not only do we do more damage, but it makes it so that mines and torpedoes, it takes a little bit more for them to one-shot us now. Exotic particle field exciter is just extra EPG. Proton particle stabilizer is there for the Dyson 3-piece. And then for our tactical consoles, we have the Lorca's custom firing controls. It's the meta DPS console for all builds now. Morphogenic Matrix Controller, again, is there for the Morphogenic 3-piece. And then Chronometric Capacitor gives us extra damage for all of our torpedoes. Extra EPG. It also gives us a little bit of extra of Polaron damage, which isn't as consequential as it was in previous versions of my science builds, but since the Morphogenic Polaron Energy Weapon is a 360 weapon, enhancing a 360 weapon is going to be nice. Alright, so that's basically it for space stuff. Hopefully that made sense. As for some fun ground stuff, just to round out the build and to conclude everything, if you're going for just a straight weapon-based things, these are the 2 missions to go for. Replay the Uneasy Allies mission 3 times once you get to level 65 to get the Romulan kit frame for whatever profession that you are, along with the Romulan Navy armor for the 2-piece of extra crit severity whenever you're crouching. That gives you an extra 30% crit severity, which is very substantial, by the way. Additionally, you replay it a 3rd time to get the Plasma Repeater Pistol. Since the Romulan kit enhances plasma damage anyway, might as well pick up the Repeater Pistol while you're there, so that you have a nice weapon to get and use going forward. Then go ahead and go over to the Temporal Front mission in the Future Proof arc, and pick up the Not Cruel Personal Shield and the Not Cruel Minigun. The 2-piece there gives you an extra 2% crit chance and 30% crit severity. Additionally, the time slip ability from the Not Cruel Shield is one of the best survival things, period, in ground combat. At least when it comes to PvE enemies. Obviously, in PvP, people know how to play around this. Either they ignore you, or they hit your distortion instead of you, so that you become vulnerable again. It depends on whatever they want to do. Basically, the 2-piece sets give you an extra 30% crit severity, which is nothing to snuff at. So it is very nice. Yes, there are better things, but on a budget, this is very, very nice. Now, as for exotic for ground, and this is going to surprise some of you, I recommend going to the Phoenix store. Now, this is because this 2-piece is very much overlooked. If you use the Stonepick Shield combined with one of these Stonepick weapons, either the gloves or the Stonepick Blast Assault, you get an additional 25 kit readiness, so you can fire things faster. Additionally, the Stonepick Blast Assault has its tertiary attack. I don't know why it doesn't say it in the description, but the tertiary attack it does AoE damage. It's not a normal like melee attack. It's just a radius AoE damage that also happens to be an AoE heal, almost akin to how Medical Tricorder works, except it's AoE. It's PB AoE. So, and also keep in mind with this particular set of weapons, when you claim them for the first time from the Phoenix store, you can keep on reclaiming them for free from your reclaim tabs, whether it's from the regular tab that you can access through the events section, or through the old Dilithium store version of the reclaim tab. You can go through either way in the game for free and reclaim those, which also means, for instance, if you start a TOS captain or discovery captain and the event tab isn't available in your time period, you can still go to the old Dilithium section in the reclaim section and still keep on reclaiming the Solmpeg Blast Assault and Solmpeg Personal Shield for you and for all of your bridge officers in that time period once you've gotten this through the Phoenix store. I still consider this budget, and because, and this is my big because here, you're guaranteed to get at least an uncommon every time you open a Phoenix prize pack. The next higher rarity is rare. You only need one of those rares to really get this to work. Get one rare and get one uncommon, and you're good to go. And you can use those for the Solmpeg Blast Assault and Solmpeg Shield, and you're good to go for your entire account. It's very, very low to lithium comparatively for a pretty nice amount for you. Additionally, because that's an AoE heal, you can equip that for all of your bridge officers, and especially when they don't have very many abilities whenever you're leveling up, giving them an AoE damage / AoE heal ability for you in ground combat in early levels is super, super powerful. It really is. But even for you as a captain, the Solmpeg Blast Assault and Solmpeg Shield, 2Ps gives you extra kit readiness so you can fire off your kit abilities faster. You have a built-in heal that you can use to switch to the weapon and push a tertiary attack to give yourself a heal. So that if you want to be a science captain and don't want to slot medical tricorder or something like that in your kit abilities, well, you can have this weapon there, and you can still have a pseudo heal already built in. You just switch that weapon, push your tertiary attack, and go back to your primary weapon and keep on going. Cool. All right, with that all talked about, I highly recommend as well going through the Cold War arc, which is one of those arcs that's not regularly in the mission journal. You have to go and find it in the game. Go ahead and talk to people if you don't understand how to get to the Cold War arc. I believe for most people you have to get to level 65 in order for that to be accessible to you. Some characters bug out and they can't access it, but talk to Cryptic in terms of a message if you really want some help in terms of getting there, and there's a bug with your particular character. But the CRM 200 is really, really nice. It does a lot of control on the battlefield, which for me as a tank player I really, really like, considering that a lot of the better kit-based science abilities also do a lot of control on the battlefield. I think it synergizes really well. Apparently, I didn't care about DPS. Apparently Timberwolf thinks that it's a really, really good DPS weapon too. If it is, cool. I like to use it for some of my builds, but it's more because I like the control on the battlefield. Pretty much for a lot of my builds at this point, it's either CRM 200 if I'm going for a more DPS oriented ground build, or I use the Lucari stuff from the Lucari reputation for a more heal based ground build. Additionally, for more DPS-oriented one, going through the temporal defense reputation, again, the temporal armor is actually pretty nice. It does have that passive 25% all damage for damage over time and hazard effects. I know some of you have said and that that's supposedly only supposed to work for weapons for their DOT and hazard effects. Several people that I've trusted on Reddit have tested this themselves, and they've said, no, this does affect kit modules too. That doesn't affect all kit modules, but it affects a lot of the kit modules that exist inside the game. So cool. It might not affect one or two of the ones I use, but it'll still affect some, if not the ones I'm using anyway. So for me, that is good enough. All right, cool. All right. But anyway, that's basically it for this video. I'm trying to record these as fast as I can with some stuff that's going on. Hopefully I don't have other things that delay me further with other things in real life. But big things is to stay safe and stay healthy. Life is going to be chaotic and weird, and it's going to probably take a while for us to get into what the new normal is going to be going forward. There's definitely going to be adjustments that are going to happen in real life. And hopefully YouTube doesn't get mad at me, if things happen as well. But anyway, thank you all for watching. Hopefully this video was useful to you. I mean, I've done a lot of these budget builds before on this channel. Many of you have been asking for another one of these, even though I didn't feel it was 100% needed, besides science, because science definitely did change for me. But here it is anyway. Again, I'm not going to probably be available to answer specific questions for a lot of your builds like I used to. But hopefully this is going to give you a good enough grasp and brainstorming session for you in terms of some options that you can start off with that are cheaper than, you know, just going to the low buy store, going to the C store to get a particular trade or a console or something. The stuff in this video should be able, once you have everything, should be able to maybe not say top any DPS charts, but at least allow you to be a strong contributor in any normal or advanced TFO inside the game. And I'm confident in saying that for sure. Anyway, thank you all for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.